All right. Thank you guys for coming here. Is it too loud?
No, I'm good.
It's weird when
Okay.
it comes out over here.
How about this? Is this better? Okay, awesome. Thank you guys for coming. I know I saw many of you guys at the queer market outside, so thank you for coming to that as well. We are excited to continue our Pride activities and celebrations today. And next up on our agenda, we are very excited to have Dr. Jeff Ludwig from the Seward House Museum coming to speak about Charlotte Cushman. And his title is Seward Family Friend and Symbol of an Age. So we have a picture of her right here by Blake Chamberlain. And we're very, very excited to hear and learn more about this famous LGBTQ person.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Kate, and thank you to everyone for coming to this and perhaps to our dramatic reading. I gave a Charlotte Cushman talk 7 or 8 years ago, and I haven't revisited it for quite a while. It was for one of Auburn's first Pride festivals after the opening of the Equal Rights Heritage Center. And Blake was here that first year. He came to the first talk I'd given, and he painted this from right outside, and I stood there watching him do it. I've always loved this picture, and Kate was nice enough to let me sneak back into the offices here and put it on display for all of you. I had asked before the camera started rolling, who here in our crowd had heard of Charlotte Cushman, and I would say maybe a third to a quarter in total. If we could have polled Americans in the 1850s, 60s, and 70s, who's heard of Charlotte Cushman, they would have looked at us like we had two heads. 100% of the English-speaking world had heard of Charlotte Cushman. She was one of the first true American celebrities and stars of the stage. She was simply called Our Charlotte in the American press. Like Madonna, she really only needed one name to be recognizable. But she's fallen a bit out of public memory ever since, and our job today is we're going to bring her back. She was cognizant that this was highly possible in her lifetime as well. For while she was counted among the great intellectuals and leading lights and artists of her time, she knew that as a theater actress, she could not leave as indelible a mark as a writer, a painter, a sculptor, a poet, because her words once uttered would disappear. And the memories of the audiences would fade as the generations passed. And who would remember Charlotte Cushman 50, 75, 150 years after the curtain fell for the last time? She wrote rather poignantly about this, and she did write a lovely memoir, and I've drawn a lot from that today. All of you can read it. It's publicly available. It's no longer behind any kind of copyright restrictions, and it's her own narrative, and then she splices in quite a few letters, and that's a treat, because in her lifetime, she urged many of the people that she was closest to burn their half of her correspondence, because she worried that, as we're going to discuss today, while she was living the life she wanted, sometimes she had to do so discreetly in the shadows, perhaps even in the closet, because she worried about backlash. She worried about that from a business standpoint. If she was too in the open about how she wanted to live, perhaps theater managers wouldn't hire her, perhaps audiences wouldn't come, perhaps critics wouldn't savage her. So she often had to negotiate in her own lifetime how to live the life she wanted. And I'm going to get into this, but she wouldn't recognize the identifiers and the terms that we would use today. A Pride festival, LGBTQ+. These were not her words, these are our words, and there's always a little bit of awkwardness when we try to read our definitions, our categories, and our vocabularies back into historical actors who never occupied that themselves. So what I want to do today is at first broach Charlotte Cushman as a worthy figure as we study gay history, queer history in the 21st century and look for 19th century antecedents. Then I want to give you her biography, which will include everything, but it's an incredible story of a woman persevering and capturing the imagination of the world, and truly the whole world. And then finally, bring our Sewards into the equation. How did she come to know Auburn, William and Frances Seward and their children, and how can we connect all these dots together here in history's hometown? I love this picture of her, and I think Grace really captured some of this spirit today. This is an 1843 portrait of Charlotte Cushman by the Philadelphia artist Thomas Sully. And he was a portrait artist to the stars himself. He painted Queen Victoria. He painted William and Frances Seward when they were quite young. The portrait in William Seward's office, if you can imagine it, or if you've not been, come to the house, is Thomas Sully's version of Frances. So it's a lovely depiction of her. And he paints her right before she breaks out as a star. She's begun to build a reputation in America, and she's about to launch into Europe on the advice of William Macready, one of the great mid-19th century British actors, who says the only way you're going to be taken seriously is if you can make it in London, in Paris, because America's got no game. America had yet to produce a great playwright, a great actor, a great artist, and she was going to be scoffed at and dismissed until she could win over the hearts and minds of Europe and go to the cradle of Shakespeare and perform Hamlet, Romeo and Juliet, Macbeth. Let's see, she would do Henry VIII. In total, she played more than 30 male parts across a 40-year career, what were called breeches parts. She made them all her own. She would play traditionally feminine parts as well, and she blurred a lot of lines in terms of gender on the stage and in life, and she did both things in ways that were truly all her own. So I wanted just to give you an image of Charlotte Cushman to put in your mind as you imagine her going through the years today. She's born in 1816. She dies just shy of her 60th birthday in 1876. And really for the midpoint of this program, I'm going to give you her full life story. This is just a brief overview. I don't want to dwell on it long. Her birth, her premiere in Boston's Tremont Theater, her original beginnings in opera, her first performance in the lead as Lady Macbeth, and then here we see 30 male roles in her lifetime, quite as many female roles. And then in over a 40-year career, she was described as the most spectacular stage actor in the history of American theater. There's a picture of her about age 40. I won't pretend to you that I have a great expertise. I have a PhD in history, but I have not a concentration or specialization in gay or queer history. So I want to know my limits and rely on the work of others and put you in touch with some of the sources that I've relied on, secondary sources that have framed a lot of my own understanding of how we can broach the subject of finding 19th century queer history, reading it back through our 21st century lens. And Jill Dolan of Princeton University, I think much more articulately than I tried to riff earlier, explains the difficulty of trying to parse this past with our own lens, our own lexicon. How can we define lesbian in a historical moment in which this terminology was unknown and perhaps even unthought? Cushman is a liminal figure, one whose life tread the borderland of 19th century notions of masculinity and femininity and complicated the various ways her most intimate relationships were understood by those around her. Cushman understood and performed her passions for other women, lacking even a language, lacking the language that would help her name her longings, desires, and sexual practices. But as we'll discuss today, just because she didn't have the names, the parlance we would use today, did not mean she didn't have the agency and the autonomy to live these longings, these desires, and these feelings. And I just love this newspaper print of she playing he. And that's something that comes up a lot when people talk about Charlotte Cushman. They have a hard time fitting her into these neat little binary categories of masculine and feminine, of man and woman, of domesticity and public sphere. Even Queen Victoria was asked to comment once she saw Cushman for the first time on the stage. She said, "I can't believe that was a woman. Everything about her was a man." And it made people think. Maybe their precepts, maybe their concepts of gender didn't need necessarily be so rigid. Unfortunately, this is also the age of high Victorianism, and rigidity was very much in their intellectual wheelhouse, despite agents like Charlotte Cushman pushing for deeper and more nuanced understandings of gender, sexuality, and identity. I love this image as well. It's Sully again. This came from an issue of, actually, I'm sorry, that's the next one. This came from a design from the Folger Shakespeare Library at Harvard. So we see the Sully, and we'll get into this lithograph of Cushman playing Romeo with her sister there, and then the watching eye in the center. And a quote from Lisa Merrill, who's got a wonderful book I can recommend to all of you. When Romeo was a woman, Charlotte Cushman and her circle of female spectators. Charlotte Cushman, a woman who loved other women, was a lightning rod for many of the culture shifts and changes of her era. In a period when most middle-class women were admonished to be passive, submissive, domestic, and above all, chaste, she endeavored to support herself, her family, and later, the women with whom she shared her life. During her lifetime, as Cushman became an object of extraordinary renown, an object of public consumption, she came to be seen as an icon or sign, in whom the threads of gender, nationality, and sexuality were interwoven for her spectators. I try not to read long blocks of text like this for presentations. I know it's bad form, but the elegance and the articulation, I think, is important. So I want to make sure we're very careful about the words we use now, especially since we are applying them backwards and relying upon these scholars who have done this deep thought work for us. And again, Lisa Merrill is a book I can recommend. Another, much newer book that I'm going to draw on a lot today is Tana Woodchuck's Lady Romeo, The Radical and Revolutionary Life of Charlotte Cushman, America's First Celebrity. Get them both. This one you can get for $12 right now on Amazon. And Prime Days are a-coming, or support your local library. This is from The Atlantic, and it speaks to the moment, the context of how sexuality was identified and circumscribed in Charlotte Cushman's era, from Jenny Gritt's But Were They Gay? The Mystery of Same-Sex Love in the 19th Century. Ambiguous relationships and arrangements weren't uncommon in Cushman's time. The Massachusetts capital, for example, was home to many educated women from good families who could support themselves without the help of any man, hence the rise of the Boston marriage between two women. And according to Peggy Weishart, it didn't necessarily occur to friends to wonder what their sex life was like. Women were perceived as being non-sexual to begin with, and most people assumed they didn't have husbands, they wouldn't have any interest in sex. A little warm in here. Just a little bit more on this background. I want to talk about these sort of same-gender intense relationships a bit further. And to extend on what Gritz was talking about, it was considered, in her words, perfectly normal for heterosexual women to have crushes on each other, to be very affectionate and so forth. A pair of women who had an actually sexual relationship could easily manage to be together without arousing suspicion that it was anything more than feminine affection. And this is because some of the biases of their age. It was assumed women were largely asexual until they were married, but it was okay in the mid-19th century in polite society for women to encourage and experience and even practice romance with each other as sort of premarital education. Unmarried women might practice their romance with other women. There was no corrupting presence of sex. So a polite fiction that society agreed it could adhere to as long as certain proprietary bounds allowed that fiction to be maintained. Boston marriages. Charlotte Cushman would never have said she was in a Boston marriage. She would have told you she was married 3 different times, that these were binding, monogamous, and loving relationships, to the extent where when one of them ended, she felt it was only right for her, even though legally she didn't have to pay a divorce settlement to her spouse, who had sacrificed so much of her career to advance Charlotte's. So just getting into the background a little bit more of how we can understand this era. And for men as well, at the Seward House, we read back into William Seward, intense male friendships. When he's quite young, he's got a friend named David Burden, with whom he goes to Union College. They are emotional and tender with each other. They exchange letters until Burden's death in his mid-20s. They speak of longing for each other physically and for their company. They want to spend time running in the meadows and climbing mountains. And he writes more passionately and sweetly to and about Burden, William Seward does, than his own wife. Abraham Lincoln has something very similar with Joshua Speed, a country lawyer that he'd traveled around with. They bunked up often and would write what they considered very manly letters about clutching themselves to each other's bosoms and thinking of those nights out on the circuit, laying in bed together, talking, and just being physically close and intellectually close, there was some room for relationships to have an emotional weight that we would look at today and scrutinize. Oh, how do we read what they're talking about? So just as we have a hard time ascribing our values and words onto them, they would also look at the ways that we comport ourselves, and they would have questions that we would need to do a lot of reconciliation of language to be able to better understand each other. Though at our base, love is love, and there'd be enough that we'd recognize even where maybe the words failed us. Last one of these sort of secondary source lit reviews for you to consider from the scholar Heather Rose Jones. Even towards the end of Cushman's life, and definitely after her death, attitudes were turning against this sort of little bit of openness, against independent, unmarried women, and especially mannish women, of whom Cushman was counted one. With the rise of late 19th century sexologists, characteristics that had been praised became seen as deviant. Descriptions of Cushman shifted in tone, aligning with this reframing. The absence of men in her life was translated into an absence of love, and her lovers were entirely erased from the record. Their passion was edited out of their biographies, lest post-Freudian readers view it as morbid. So the stakes, and perhaps some other explanation in addition to an actress disappearing once her time on the stage closes in a pre-recording age, the way that scholars began to change, manipulate how they would discuss Cushman's life to edit and read out some of the things they struggled to explain or understand about her life and her life choices. So now into part two, the really, really fun stuff. The exciting biography of this amazing woman, Charlotte Cushman. She was born in 1816 in Boston. Her father traced his lineage all the way back to the Cushmans on the Mayflower. Old New England Puritans, though, over time, they began to lose a little bit of that fire and brimstone. She came from a family that valued art and music and literature. Unfortunately, her father, a successful merchant, disappears from her life when she's about 13, simply abandons his family. Cushman had older brothers, younger brothers, and she had a brother, Charles, with whom she enjoyed a fun game. Growing up in Boston, upper middle class until she was 13, she enjoyed quite a lot of privilege. And she and Charles had this game. They'd go to Boston Harbor to the end of the wharf, and they would begin by standing on the very first ship and try to jump from bow to bow, ship to ship, and not touch down again until they got to dry land. Well, when she was 10, she misjudged the distance on one of her jumps and went plunging into the foul water of Boston Harbor in her petticoats and hoops and heavy dress, and was being dragged under their weight when a sailor reached his hand in and was able to pluck her out, soaking wet and frigid. She was undressed and put into men's clothing. And in the words of Woodchuck and Cushman, this becomes a baptism, experiencing the world in the clothing of a man. She's seeing gender in new ways, and she's feeling somewhat different about the whole world while she's presenting as a man. This was a significant moment in her life that she remembered and has been documented back. I wouldn't use, again, our words to talk about something like an awakening, but it was a significant moment in her life. She was privileged, as I say, education, prep schools, mingling with some of the elite families of Boston until her father left and left the family near destitute. Cushman's mother, Mary Eliza, would take on raising the rest of the children, and she opened up a boarding house. Cushman spent the next several years of her life washing linens, throwing ash into toilets to mask the odious smell, cooking and cleaning. One of the few joys of her life during this hardscrabble fall from grace was that they were 3 blocks from Tremont Theater in Boston. And many of the boarders were stage actors and stage actresses who were coming in and staying at the house and bringing this exciting life of the theater in with them. She would listen to them and then began to read scripts. She had a great memory. She would read Shakespeare, and she could be, in her own mind, off book, which would be a real thing she could do pretty quickly, easily. She had a mind and a knack for memorization and for listening, mimicry, doing voice work, and she felt herself increasingly drawn to this world. But how was she ever going to make the leap? She convinced an uncle who felt some guilt to take her to see a show in Tremont Theater about 3 years later, And to say it was life-changing would be an understatement. She was drawn instantly into the gaslights, the boards, the whole spectacle of it, to the point where she decided she was going to take her chances and try to make a life in theater for herself. She had, by all accounts, a beautiful singing voice. She was rarely talented in many, many areas, but especially here. She had a register that could go from soprano to contralto, and it was a voice unlike any other. A woman named Mary Wood, who she and her husband would do musical productions, were holding auditions. They heard Cushman sing. They glommed onto her and said, "Do we have a job for you?" So initially, Charlotte Cushman's early life, she's about 18, 19, 20, is trying to make it as an opera singer. She does well enough in Boston, playing second fiddle to Mrs. Wood, and they decide they're going to go to New Orleans, some exciting theaters down there. And so they take Cushman, from the only life she's ever known, in Boston, with her. It's opening night. They're playing the St. Charles Theater in New Orleans. It's an exciting but intimidating new world for her. She steps onto the stage, 4,000-seat theater, the biggest she's ever played, and she begins to sing, and her voice fails. She's injured her vocal cords, she can't perform, and she suffers 3 humiliating nights where she is booed and jeered by the crowd, and it seems like all may be lost. The theater owner and his wife, however, see some talent in her and offer her a lesser role. They're about to do a production of Macbeth. She joins the cast, and in these days, you had to scrounge for your own costumes. You did not get paid very much money if you were in the side cast. And she was biding her time, waiting for her moment, listening to the rafters, making notes how the owner's wife was butchering Lady Macbeth and getting her all wrong. And she became ill. And she was able to step for the first time into the lead role, and she stole the show. She had, by all accounts, the energy of a pantheress or a python. It was said she didn't perform Shakespearean productions. She personified exactly as the bard intended every major part that he envisioned. It was like seeing Shakespeare came to life. You didn't see her as Charlotte Cushman anymore. She moved around the stage as a whirlwind, as Lady Macbeth, a wild woman. Fake blood on her hands. It was after seeing her Lady Macbeth that Abraham Lincoln went back to the Gettysburg Address, I'm talking 30 years in the future, and repenned some of the words. He was so moved by how she brought this loss and violence to the fore. It went so well that she was officially launched. From Lady Macbeth, she was then cast to be Mary, I want to say Morelli's, is that right, Jack? Guy Mannering, Walter Scott, where she basically plays a gypsy woman who's adopted a son, who's then captured. She's the leader of this pack, and she brought a ferocity and intensity to the role that startled and scared audience members. Again, they couldn't see a human being, Charlotte Cushman, anymore. They saw a wild woman inhabiting the spotlight and embodying the role. She continued this and now began to launch herself, I'm not ready for that slide yet, began to launch herself back towards New York. New Orleans was not where she wanted to be. She returns to New York, and she's hoping to play the glamorous Park Theater. She's got her credentials, she's got her references, reviews from her Lady Macbeth and Morelli's in New Orleans, but the owner of the Park Theater doesn't know her from Adam and says no thank you. She is forced to perform at the 5 Points in the Bowery. And in the Bowery boys aplenty, theater was a spectacle for the masses. It was connoted with strong drink, licentiousness, brothels nearby, gambling. This was no place for respectable women. And there was some debate whether the theater was for respectable women at all, or if it was of low class, unlike perhaps a European tradition, though there's always been the high seats and the low seats. The Bowery, to make a spectacle, would use live gunpowder, live explosions on the stage, everything to be high-level intensity. She was cast to play the Mother Nancy from Dickens's Oliver Twist, prostitute. And to get into character, she walked the 5 Points at night, and she witnessed and she spoke with prostitutes on their night walks. She even traded her own silk dress for the rags of a prostitute, and that became her costume on the Bowery stage. She finally captured the attention of the Park Theater, and she was cast to play Romeo. She had a younger sister, Susan. Susan had a bit of a hard early break in life. After Charlotte left, her mother was trying desperately to find means for her. There was an older man who claimed he was wealthy and dying and liked the family and wanted only to marry her to leave her something in life. Turns out he was neither dying nor rich. Susan becomes pregnant and he disappears. To help make something of Susan, Charlotte says, let's go together. I'll be Romeo, you be Juliet. And their performances throughout the 1840s would really change everything for her. She's playing in New York, she's playing in Albany, Philadelphia, she's traveling the country, and Americans began to appreciate, for the first time, a homegrown talent. Here we can see Cushman again, cast as Romeo. She took these breeches parts, and as critics observed, she was more convincing playing a man on stage than playing a woman in life. That's how they described Charlotte Cushman. I had the chance a couple of years ago to go to the Smithsonian Museum of American History. This is my picture. She is remembered there, looking at 19th century American culture, some panels, and the same red dress you saw a picture of is on display. So if you find yourself in the Smithsonian and you want to see her costume from her portrayal of Cardinal Wolsey, you can do that. William McCready told Charlotte Cushman she had enough talent to become the next Edmund Kean. And these names only mean something to you if you love your 19th century history of the stage. But she would never experience that in America. To truly make her mark, to truly become a star of the stage, she would have to prove it. Not just at the Park Theater in New York, that she could do Romeo and breeches parts, and she could do any number of characters. She could play Hamlet. But you have to impress the throngs of Europe. She was prepared to go, but she had signed a one-year contract at the Walnut Theater in Philadelphia. She was managing, she was performing. Basically, her life was still the hustle. Shows 6 nights a week, barely making ends meet, supporting by now her mother living with her, Susan. Susan has the child, a son named Ned. She has another brother that needs financial support. So she's got a lot of mouths to feed. And so during this year in Philadelphia, it seems for the first time Charlotte Cushman begins to explore the kind of life she wants to lead and now has some means and autonomy and power to do it. And she goes to Thomas Sully's studio in Philadelphia, and his house is still there. You can find his house in Philadelphia today. And he paints the iconic portrait of her that we've seen already. Sully's got 9 children, including a daughter, Rose, or Rosalie. This is a painting of him, of his daughter, by him of his daughter, Rosalie. She and Cushman become incredibly close over their year together in Philadelphia. They go riding out into the country. Cushman dines with the Sullys nearly every night, and they're sitting up and talking, and eventually it becomes more than that. And they explore romantic love. It's the first time Cushman writes about sleeping with another woman. This was a big step for her. It was a risky move. Her mother could see this infatuation growing. She was still living with mom. And her mother said, you can't do this, you will ruin us, because she's operating under these mores of the 19th century. And if word gets out that you aren't just playing breeches part, but you're truly stepping away from the circumscribed world of what it is to be woman, there will be punitive consequences. You won't be cast, you won't be hired. We'll be back on the streets and you'll be throwing ash in toilets again. Do you want that? She did not want that. But also she did not want to give this love up. As time ticked away and as the summer of 1844 approached, the end of her contract, the opportunity to go to Europe, these two decide they are going to be wed together. Cushman gives Rose Sully a ring, and Rose gives Cushman hair jewelry from her own hair as they prepare for a long-distance relationship. Rose cannot convince her father to let her go to Europe too. So Cushman takes her leave, and on the night she leaves, Rose says, married. We're married. I don't care what the law says. I don't care what the state will allow us to do. These sort of unregulated or Boston or single-sex marriages. We are married, and you are my wife. The This is a lovely picture of Charlotte Cushman by Sully, given her before she left. She sails to Europe, unsure of what she's going to find. She arrives in England in late 1844, and she has to once again start from scratch. She's got no reputation there. So she will once again have to start from the bottom and work her way up. She plays the hits first. Lady Macbeth, what Lincoln always said was her best role. Romeo, Queen Catherine in Henry VIII, Hamlet. And before long, she has captured the hearts of Europe. As she writes after just 1 year, "I have done more than any American has done in London. I truly have. No American has succeeded as I have, yet I feel so sick for home. I hardly know what to do." She's homesick for Rosalie. "Play Lady Macbeth tomorrow. I hardly have the strength to hold my head up." The reviews were incredible. Let's see if I can just find you a few of these. Audiences could not believe they were looking at A, a woman playing Romeo, B, an American. She'd lost all affectation, she'd mimicked Macready, and had a perfect high-born English accent. Her swordplay was considered better than any man who'd come before her. She was Romeo, darting about the stage. Men appreciated her swagger. They said she walked like a man, she spoke like a man, she moved her body with the confidence of a man. She operated as one who knew how to take up space. The most manly thing about her was her sense of freedom. Some women said that, even better, seeing Charlotte Cushman, one could see how lovemaking, as practiced by the other sex, could seem a very different affair. Women were in love with her. Men wanted to be her. Men wanted their husbands to be her. So she begins to rise very quickly. She tours Europe, and in the early 1850s, she begins to manage her own finances pretty well. There's a Staffordshire porcelain set of her as Romeo and Susan as Juliet, and Susan will go with her. That is in every middle-class household in most of England, comes back into America. There's a lithograph set based on the same that becomes widely circulated. We all, as middle-class Albernians in the 1850s, would have wanted these decorations in our own house because we love our Charlotte. Just one problem, Walt Whitman said. We've made a huge mistake. We didn't appreciate her while she was here. Now she's gone to Europe. Why would she ever come home again? She's welcome there, and she's entering into relationships there a little bit more openly with other women than she could do here. There's a smash up with Rosalie that lets that happen. Thomas Sully hears from the rumor mill about his daughter's relationship and marriage, shuts it down, refused to let her receive mail, cuts her off entirely from Charlotte until finally she's told, "Do not speak of this. This is over. Don't contact us again." These were some of the consequences, the risks engendered in trying to live a life openly in the 19th century. She's heartbroken, but she begins to get over it slowly. Rosalie Sully dies in 1847. And she meets in England another American, expat and intellectual, Matilda Hayes, who went by the name Max. She also liked to dress like a man, and Cushman really liked that. They began to dress exactly like each other, as some said, very mannishly, liberating for them. A fellow actress, and she even played Juliet opposite Cushman a few times. They began their own relationship, and they will be also married, as far as Cushman is concerned, by the end of the 1840s. And in 1849, having proved it at last in Europe, Cushman is ready to go back to America, not because the stages are better, but because the pay will be. And now nobody's going to make her start over. She can command any price, and she does command to be paid as much as Edwin Forrest or Edwin Booth or anybody else. She gets the same take as the best leading men of her day. And by the way, she performs alongside Edwin Booth, John Wilkes Booth, who she thinks is a daredevil and I won't use that word, a bad guy. She likes Edwin a little bit better. And as I said, Junius Booth, their father. So back home to New York in 1849 with Max. In their female marriage, as they sometimes put it. Elizabeth Barrett Browning who is socially friends as a fellow intellectual with the couple, writes about them, "I understand that she," Cushman, "and Miss Hayes had made vows of celibacy and of eternal attachment to each other, and they lived together, dress alike. It is a female marriage." Back to Walt Whitman. He encounters Charlotte Cushman. "Thank goodness, we've got her home. She's back in 1849. Now, she's making money. She's got this lovely merch. At one point, she's got $600,000 of her own money that she's managing, as we'll talk about with the Sewards, investing herself, and traveling around the entire country to sold-out houses, keeping the take. Whitman's happy that she's back. She's with Max, and she is living the life she wants to live, including how she's going to dress and how she's going to behave. Now that she's got, I'm going to get to my quote here. A little more status, a little more economic security, and she's got Max. Around the U.S., she begins to step out a little more from the shadows and into the open with the way she wants to live, dressing how she wants to like, loving who she wants to love, and being in this female marriage. Whitman meets her, as he writes, in the Cleveland Plain Dealer. Miss Charlotte Cushman, who's spending a quiet vacation, astonished guests one morning by appearing equipped cap a pie in masculine attire, hat, coat, unmentionables, and all. You have seen her personification of Hamlet. You can easily understand the grace and ease with which she wears her new toggery. Here was a single moment of triumph. Not a mere desire to astonish the table and then let the ghost of Banquo to vanish away and go back to petticoats and whalebone. No, she rode for it. And for that, we can learn she had determined to wear this attire for the remainder of her days. She's going to do her. While on this American tour, and she stays in the U.S. until 1852, making this money, she and Max meet a woman named Harriet Hosmer, who joins up with them. She's a neoclassical sculptor. They meet her when she's in Boston. Both women are drawn to her. They wouldn't use words like polyamory, but there is some suggestion of them bringing her into their relationship and into a household they will establish. Hosmer, coins their grouping the Jolly Bachelors. That's how she refers to them. The Jolly Bachelors. And Hosmer's got a great quote. I honor every woman who has the strength enough to step outside the beaten path when she feels that her walk lies in another, strength enough to stand up and be laughed at if necessary. And this, I think, runs very parallel to some of the letters that Grace was reading earlier as Charlotte Cushman, living this life intensely and in earnestly, or as Walt Whitman was observing of Charlotte Cushman back in the U.S. and now feeling empowered a little more. But perhaps not all the way, because there can be dangers to living too openly. Violent backlash, a lack of recognition, a lack of appreciation for these female marriages. Europe and its bohemian culture seem a little bit safer. And just as Cushman's made enough money on this 3-year run, she decides she's going to buy a great villa in Rome, not far from the Medicis. And she's going to establish an artist colony and commune for all the women like her who want to come and live there and love each other and live lives of the mind and artistic creativity. So she takes a break from the theater, and she calls it a retirement, not for the last time. And she begins to build this fascinating world for herself. As Tina writes, others found the Jolly Bachelors exciting, and Charlotte's home became the epicenter of social life for expats living in Rome. The conversation was brilliant, the politics radical, abolitionists, women's emancipation, women's rights radicalism. Privately, however, the house was full of passionate artists who fell in and out of love with each other, maybe not unlike the real world. Henry James visited, and he did not approve a prudish sense of 19th century morality that would not for the last time sting at Charlotte Cushman. He called what he observed there a harem-scarum of women artists. Harriet Hosmer can be seen there surrounded by what they called the workmen. Men couldn't live there, they could visit, and they could do work. Harriet's workmen at the villa established by Charlotte Cushman, where she lives, with Max and Charlotte and others coming and going. Nathaniel Hawthorne was far kinder. He went to visit. He'd been suffering from terrible writer's block, and he knew Harriet pretty socially. And he comes and he spends time at their salons. Everything loosens up, and it's inspired by his time here that he pens The Marble Fawn. And if you read that book, it's about women intellectuals living as expatriates in Europe like this, and you can read many of the real-life characters from this villa into Hawthorne's work. We've got Seward's copy. He was interested in what they were doing. More on him soon. Into the harem-scarum steps an American artist named Emma Stebbins. Best known for her work, Angel of the Waters. And if you don't know that, I'm going to show you what it is. You're like, oh my God, that's her? It is. They met when Cushman returned to the stage later in the 1850s, following a divorce from Hayes. So at a certain point in Rome, needing more money, Cushman goes back to play the stages of London. Max has her own work to do, and she and Hosmer develop a very passionate two-way relationship for a time. Cushman is incensed, goes to London without her, and makes a new connection in the person of Emma Stebbins. Max catches her writing all sorts of letters back to London and Stebbins from Rome. At one point says, I demand to see what you're writing to her. And Cushman says, no, you won't. Yes, I will. Cushman takes the letter, stuffs it in her mouth, and swallows it. That's when Max knew it was very likely over. And they had a divorce. They left each other formally. They ended their marriage. And Cushman would actually grant her divorce monies. Emma Stebbins is the next marriage then. She would take care of Cushman later in her life and is the primary romantic partner for her afterwards. And I want to get back into her in just a moment. There's another interesting person who comes up during these years of relationships sort of folding into each other named Emma Crow, later Emma Cushman. Emma Crow had a financially astute father, Wayland, who eventually becomes the business manager for Charlotte Cushman. And Cushman is much taken with Emma Crow, calling her her little lover. Traveling back to America, however, she realized she needed to work those polite fictions. And she thought she was going to be able to have both her marriage and Emma Crow by introducing her to her nephew Ned, Susan's son, encouraging them strongly to marry, keeping them close by, and thinking they could continue to live a life where she could perhaps have multiple partners. It didn't really work out that way, and Crow is infatuated, but at this point, and we'll see this in Fanny as well, she sees more of Charlotte Cushman as an icon and an idol and a person to aspire to be like. I maybe don't want to be your partner. I maybe want to be a new version of you and live my life the way you're living yours. Crow wrote that for young women, especially Americans, Cushman personified all the dreams that flitted through a girl's fancy, and she became their idol. It's hard to really do a lot of great historical primary research into Cushman because she burned letters, and of course her own memoirs. It's an inside job, like Seward. She's presenting the version of herself she most wants to share. Other aspects are written out of the history, much as scholars would do to her later. Emma Crow, later Emma Cushman, she marries Ned and takes the name, is wonderful for historians because she didn't burn letters, even though she was supposed to. And then in the 19-teens, she wrote memoirs and documented her life alongside Charlotte Cushman. So she's a great entry point into it. So these artist intellectuals, Harriet Hosmer, The Sleeping Fawn, Clasped Hands of Elizabeth and Robert Browning, and Angel of the Waters, now you know, right in Central Park. She was the designer for this. She got the contract in 1863 as the park is being developed. This is right where the Walk of Poets ends, one of the most beautiful parts in all of Central Park. And I want to share with you something that you may not know, but I want you to know that the next time you go to New York City, seek this out, stare up at it, it's beautiful, come up to the catacombs or come at it from any side, and know that you were looking at what was almost certainly a secret tribute to Charlotte Cushman, an actress whose life would not be commemorated in many other ways. Emma had begun working on the statue that would be her masterpiece, Angels of the Waters for the Bethesda Fountain in Central Park. She got the commission in 1862. The angel shares Charlotte's powerful body, her strong thighs and hips, her powerful back and shoulders. The fountain would commemorate the opening of the Croton Aqueduct, which brought clean water to New York City and would stand at the end of the Poets' Walk in Central Park. The angel holds a lily, symbol of healing. Though no women were celebrated on the Poets' Walk, Emma used the opportunity to make the Bethesda Fountain a secret tribute to Charlotte Cushman. What's Seward got to do with any of this other than reading some Hawthorne? The first time I can find any evidence that the Sewards were aware of Charlotte Cushman's directly seeing her on stage is 1851, which is not to say they didn't overlap. Cushman was performing in Albany and living in the same hotel as many state senators in 1837, right in between Seward's tenure as state senator and a governor. She is playing to packed houses in Seward's New York in the 1840s. She's playing in Philadelphia. He would have read reviews about her. He would have been familiar with her name, her legacy, and her contributions to American arts, but he does not see her perform for the first time until 1851. Seward loved the theater. In his lifetime, easily attended hundreds of productions. I had never heard of this. Jack, have you? The Stranger? It's an 18th century German comedy, probably really hilarious. That was very popular through the mid-19th century. There's a letter here from 1851. It is the bottom letter saying, it was the first time wait, where are we? Oh, yes. The theater to see Charlotte Cushman, and it was of much interest to the governor. The next time he saw her was in 1852 on that American tour. And Fred writes to his mother, "Father is very interested in her. We went out to see her do Shakespeare." So Seward began to patronize Cushman starting in the early 1850s. It's unclear, because then there's a gap in the letters until the end of that decade, but most accounts, secondary accounts, suggest that during this decade they become friends. It would have been tricky because Cushman would have left and she's in Europe that much of the 1850s, but they seemingly make a connection during these productions. Cushman's very comfortable speaking to politicians. And some of these letters are just very interesting that come a bit later. Cushman writes to Fanny Seward, never have I so heartached for home. This is during the war. Yet, had I been at home, I should have felt I wanted to hurry to Washington to see your father and thank him with my heart and my hands for all his good works. The world will never know half how your father has been sustaining power in the government, but know it, my soul is deeply grateful. Cushman writes here, Miss Charlotte Cushman writes me a very manly letter in which, like herself, she also expresses a very proper, though feminine appreciation of Anna and desires to be affectionately remembered to Anna, his daughter-in-law, and to yourself. After the election of 1860, Cushman returns briefly to Washington. There's the wedding of Ned and Emma. There's a child that's going to be born to them in St. Louis. And she comes back home to Washington on the eve of the Civil War. And Cushman is introduced to Abraham Lincoln directly by Seward. Here's how she recounts their meeting. Him rising in the White House beside the flag in front of his marble fireplace, tilting back in his chair, and drawled on his eager references to the theater, especially Shakespeare, to plays he had seen recently when he slipped unannounced into a box. Now, Grace read a really interesting letter today that she wrote about William Seward. She's visiting Washington right as the war is about to start, and he's trying to mansplain to her how this war is going to go. Oh, over in 30 or 60 days, Charlotte. She's come back to the United States because she sees this trouble. After the wedding, she's like, I need to move all my assets out of American investments because this country's about to blow. And this is not a stable investment strategy for me, a shrewd woman. And Seward's like, don't sell your securities, please. 30 days, 60 days. She tells him he couldn't be more wrong. This is going to be a devastating and protracted war, and she's going to go ahead and take her assets out of American holdings in the meantime. But they remain very good friends. Whenever she comes to Washington, she stays in the Lafayette Square house, and Seward has to build a strong diplomatic corps. Grace did a nice job today also speaking to, when the Sewards thought about Charlotte Cushman and thought about sexuality, they knew all these polite fictions, and they knew they were being stretched to their utmost limits. They didn't care. There was no judgment. She was welcome in their home, regardless of what the scandal monger said or the moralist said. They loved her for her. Seward also loved her because he got a lot of free work out of Charlotte Cushman. My God. He's got to convince the English not to go to war against the United States. And he's going to build a propaganda machine. He's going to place spies and diplomats and buy newspapers. But there is no better ambassador for the Union Blue than Charlotte Cushman, who as Seward's emissary goes back to London, plays the stage, but also plays the power brokers. As Emma writes it in her book, she could help moderate the antagonism among the English as she circulates among them. So Seward is very happy to have her sent back to England in 1861 and 1862, and to be yet another set of ears in the room, and another person who can try to manipulate Lord Palmerston and the English on the brink of maybe recognizing the Confederacy. And here we can just see some of the diplomacy. She's integral to that. This is Frederick to his mother, talking about another integral act that Charlotte Cushman gave to the family. He's writing to his mother about Charlotte Cushman coming back to America in the fall of 1863, once again to serve Lincoln, Seward, and the Union cause, out of retirement to do several weeks of benefit performances, with all proceeds to go to the U.S. Sanitation Commission. That might sound gross. What that really is a women's body of volunteers raising money, creating bandages, uniforms. They would ultimately raise $25 million in the 1860s to support the Union cause. Cushman brings a lot of that bank home herself. She will headline shows. So Americans who haven't had a chance to see Charlotte Cushman in a decade are coming out in droves in the North and the West to see her perform again. And she is stealing hearts. She's in Philadelphia, she's in Baltimore. And in Fred's letter, he writes about, we've all just come from Grover's Theater. It's right across from Ford's Theater. Lincoln and Seward walked there together with the families. They watched Cushman perform. And what did she do? She gave Lincoln exactly what he asked, his favorite performance of hers. Will you play Lady Macbeth? For you, Mr. President, I will. And who's going to be my Macbeth? Edwin Booth. You can see here some of the take. She raised about $8,000 just from the few shows she was able to do here. Philadelphia, Boston, Washington, Baltimore. In the letter also, Fred says she continues to be very helpful. We went to dinner at Lord Lyons' home, and Lord Lyons is the British minister of the United States, a favorite of Queen Victoria, reporting back and influencing whether or not and to what extent Britain is going to be involved in the war. So Cushman is able to also manipulate and work over Lord Lyons for Seward. Cushman was an admirer of Henry's, and she writes so to Fanny at the end of the war, after the attack against the family, and Seward was very badly injured. She was worried about him. She's back in Europe. And she writes again, faithful and true as your noble father ever is. The world abroad recognizes his power more than any man in our country. He has truly been its savior. She credited him for that. I love him individually for myself, but generally for my country, which owes him more than any other living man. Thank him for me, for all he said in his speech, and all he's done for this country. I recognize in all things that occur the results he prognosticated and feel that he deserves his title, the Sage of Auburn. Fanny Seward, Seward's young daughter, born about 5 years after Emma Crowe, is also introduced to Charlotte Cushman during these years. And she writes after meeting her, I am really attached to her. She shall be my model in the maiden life I am perhaps to lead. Charlotte Cushman and all useful unmarried women. Though Cushman would have said, I am actually married. I do not know her age, between 50 and 60. This is towards the end of Cushman's life. Her face is girlish, color from animation, again, so full grandeur that it cannot fail to be impressive. It is full of soul. Few at 16 possess the wonderful vivacity which animates Miss Cushman. This is Fanny writing about her, having seen her do Lady Macbeth, and then gone to dinner with Lord Lyons. And during these dinners, Cushman begins to really favor Fanny. Emma Crowe's a bit jealous. When Fanny dies in 1866, and I am doing short shrift here to these stories, there's a lot of Seward's and Cushman's memoir, a lot about Fanny, a lot about Henry. I would urge all of you to continue your own reading. Again, this is all public domain. She writes a very sweet letter to Henry about his loss and how her last letter had been, what a dear friend she was. I think both of them had hoped, Cushman and William Seward, that Fanny would see in Cushman an idol and live a life like that herself. Fanny wrote, again, back in October 1863, "I can put my hand in hers or take that strong arm and feel so confident." That's what Cushman gave a generation of young women, confidence to be more than society said they were supposed to be or could only be. That great heart of hers is full of warm affection and tenderness. Cushman also has got a history with Auburn. She said, gosh, what I wouldn't give to be at that house, to hear Seward give these great speeches of his. She never made it here while he was secretary, but she came often in her later life to see Seward in retirement, and she unretired several more times. There was always a need for Charlotte Cushman to make more money to support her lifestyle. She leaves Europe after the war, and she builds a house for herself in Newport. Emma and Ned are living there, and their children, and Emma Stebbins. So she comes back 2 more times through Auburn, in 1872 and in 1875 for dramatic readings. Basically, at this point, she would sit in a chair, and she would do Lady Macbeth and Mary Morelli's and Hamlet and Romeo, and she would just kind of do the monologues. People loved it. She played at the Opera House, which is, if you could take William Street today to where it ends, it would take you to Dill. There was no Dill, so the Auburn Opera House, where Cushman performed, would be at the end of William Street right here, so not at all far from the Seward House or where we are right now. She's represented in William Seward's Diplomatic Gallery, and she's number 77. Her portrait and a poem that she wrote. It's unclear whether she wrote this for Fanny or William Seward. It's hard to read the handwriting, but she's writing the verse from James Russell Lowell. New occasions teach new duties. Time makes ancient good uncouth. They must upward still onward who would keep abreast of truth. She passes away of pneumonia in 1876, is buried at Mount Auburn Cemetery, and as Lisa Merrill writes, she was, at the time of her death, the most celebrated woman in the English-speaking world because she had been seen by millions of audience members in both the United States and in Britain during all of her years on stage. And she was an icon for Americans. They had parades celebrating her. So her importance as a cultural figure was unprecedented. So in her time, not remembered, not tied to something like Pride, LGBTQ+, but historians now have, for at least 2 generations, been casting back, finding her where the audiences left her. When that last curtain dropped, her last words were uttered, and as time went by and that mark faded, and then her reputation becomes twisted in this Freudian late Victorian era, and she was read as amoral, she was read as asexual. We're winning her back, book by book, article by article. And I wanted to close by sharing the words that Charlotte Cushman wrote for herself when she left for England in 1844. She'd bid her first wife, Rose, goodbye. They had exchanged rings. She said, I'll be back for you in 6 months. It would be 5 years. They were both infatuated and heartbroken. Rose also gave her a blank diary. She said, you must write down everything you do every day and share it with me when you get home. And the first thing she did on the title page of the book was write these words from Longfellow's Hyperion. I think it's a great way to close today. Look not mournfully into the past. Go forth to meet the dark and the shadowy future without fear and with a manly heart. We know she did. Thank you for indulging my hour-long history of Charlotte Cushman. If anybody has any questions, again, I have really stretched my expertise to the limits on the LGBTQ history and her theatrical career. But we could talk more about the Sewards or anything else if anybody wants to go deeper on Cushman. And remember, she was a big star in Auburn, and you can come visit this picture here at the Equal Rights Center from time to time. Get Lady Romeo, come see us, see her in the Diplomats Gallery. Anybody have any questions? Jack.
Is the Fanny-Charlotte correspondence at U of R?
It mostly is. Fanny also didn't burn the letters, which is great. Cushman was also often very careful, and she warned people. If she wrote to Emma Crow a couple times, because she knew Emma wasn't really doing what she was supposed to do. If you don't burn my letters, I'm going to have to stop writing to you in the way that you want me to. I need to know I can trust this as a safe channel. Emma still didn't do it. Charlotte even said, how about this? Don't burn the current letter until you get the next letter. That way you always have a letter, but do please burn them, dear. Fanny didn't burn them. I think they were much earlier in a relationship, so Cushman was a little bit less revelatory. In her memoirs, she writes about the general prescriptive advice that she gave to young American women in general, about living artistic lives, about being individuals, about being fulfilled, more implied than overt about gender identity and sexuality, though she does say, don't ever take a husband, that's sexual slavery. But to most American girls who would write her like fan mail, she would be more opaque, be independent, be an artist, and not delve any more deeply. So Fanny's letters with her are closer to that than they are to Crow's. Fanny's diaries also paint quite a picture. And the house, most of the Cushman letters, there are 27 letters at University of Rochester that you can read today. SewardProject.org with Charlotte Cushman in them. The house actually has some as well. I'm not sure how we still have them, but our Emma Daly, gave me the Cushman letters that we have from her to the house. We didn't burn them either, so I'm glad we didn't.
Ages ago, I saw Matthew Brady photograph of her as Maggie Morelli's. She's just bent over an old crone in costume. It's a wonderful picture.
She made her own costumes in those days. She did her own makeup. And she did all that. She was unrecognizable as Charlotte Cushman when she stepped onto that stage as Morelli's. And the gasps were deafening. Let's see, where is she? And she's not old here. She is what would she have been? She would have been about 30. So she did her own effects to try to make herself look like a crone. Well, thank you all so much for coming, and we hope to see you at the Seward House soon.